What is up, everybody? Welcome to this MLS Cup recap video. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Columbus Crew 2, LAFC 1. The scoreline does not exactly explain what happened in this game. The first half was absolutely dominated by the Crew. They came out on the front foot as expected, and this looked exactly like anyone who has seen these two teams play this season would expect. Columbus had 75-80% of the possession. LAFC were trying to play on the counter. They did not have a lot of success doing so, although they did keep Columbus in check for a little while there, and there just wasn't that much happening in the first 30 or so minutes of this game. Then you get the handball. Cucho Hernandez converts the penalty, and everything changes for LAFC because the whole game plan was predicated on getting that first goal or keeping the game 0-0 so that you can play on the counter, so that you don't have to take the initiative, so that you can do the things you've been doing this season. As soon as that first one went in, all of that goes out the window. Now you got to start chasing the game. And before they could even get into the game, Odmanson plays the ridiculous pass to Yaya Boa, and it's 2-0. And now you're in big trouble if you're LAFC. And ultimately, Denny Bouanga does Denny Bouanga things. He gets the goal back. Patrick Schulte makes a really good save. Bouanga puts the rebound in. And because it's the Columbus Crew, it can never be easy. You can never just keep the clean sheet. That's not how this works. They give up goals. It's stressful at the end. Now, it wasn't super stressful. It's not like LAFC had all of these terrific chances. They had an opportunity here or there. But defensively, the Crew were very good. It's just that because of the way they play and their refusal to deviate from it, they are going to be open. They're going to leave themselves exposed. You're going to have chances. They're not going to just try and shut the game down. And you saw that even with the substitutions. The guys who came in to rescue the game against Cincinnati, Julian Gressel, Christian Ramirez, came in this game too to try and get the third goal. That is who the Crew are. Deserving winners absolutely on the day. They have some chances to get to 3. They can't take advantage, but ultimately they keep it 2-1 without too much stress. They did score multiple goals in every single one of their playoff games. That's a recipe for success and allows you a little bit of flexibility defensively. And they just did enough on that side. They held on against Orlando, gave their offense time to get going, made sure didn't get too out of hand against Cincinnati, kept themselves kind of in the game, and then the offense came to life. This game was much more of the just dominance and able to see it out without too many issues. But very, very impressive performance. There are kind of two different parts of this for me. And I'll start with the LAFC side and then finish with the Crew. LAFC's inability to adapt to what happened in this game, to adjust to going behind, was maybe not stunning, but it was at the very least jarring. 12 months ago, I sat here talking about this team's tactical flexibility, their ability to win multiple ways as one of the foundational reasons why they won MLS Cup last season. Because they can go do what they needed to do against the Seattle Sounders and just kind of sneak in a goal and squeak out a 1-0 win. They have the ability to do that now. Under Steve Schwindel, this transition from more possession-based to more transition-based. The problem is when you go too far in the transition-based part of this, you are so reliant on getting that opening goal, as I mentioned before. And so to me, last season they had the perfect balance. They didn't have to be dominant, but they could also rip you apart with 55-60% possession. This is the game where they need to be able to get their foot on the ball, to not let Columbus come at them for 90 minutes, and they just couldn't do it. Or at least they couldn't do it until they absolutely had no other choice because they were down 2 goals. I refuse to believe it is a coincidence that their one postseason success, well, 2 things, that they have had way more postseason success under Steve Cherundolo than Bob Bradley, and that their one ultimate postseason triumph came in their most flexible, diverse season. I refuse to believe that's a coincidence. You have got to be able to win games multiple ways. They proved they could win on one end of the spectrum against Seattle. And to a certain extent, against Houston as well. Now you had to go win the other way, where your defense isn't there to keep a clean sheet, where you're facing this incredible attacking team, where you've got to be able to have some possession to relieve some of the pressure, and they just couldn't do it. It is telling, and Taylor Twellman pointed this out in the broadcast, and I was thinking about it even before he said it. You have gone a complete 180 for LAFC, right? You went from being the Columbus Crew in the Bob Bradley years to now being the team where it's 75-80% of the possession 20 minutes into the game, and you go, this is exactly what we expected. You have got to be able to do this multiple ways. It's just how tournaments work, because you're not going to be able to always have things go the way you want. And that's, again, Columbus. They can hang in there defensively sometimes, and obviously they're going to try and beat you with their possession and their attack. But statistically, they were within the margin of error from a defensive standpoint this season. They were one of the teams that met the criteria that I laid out at the beginning of the playoffs. They are not so one-sided that they couldn't do this. So that's the real question for LAFC moving forward. Of course, they're incredibly talented. They're dynamic in transition. Bouanga is a problem. But you gotta have a plan B. And they just didn't when they came up against a really, really, really good team. And part of this is maybe the fact that they're just playing in the Western Conference, and quite frankly, the 4 or 5 best teams outside of LAFC in this league are in the East, at least this season. So they didn't have to go up against the Cincinnatis, the Orlandos, the Philadelphias, the New Englands, the Columbuses too often and run into this kind of problem. Obviously, not all those teams play the way Columbus do, but they kind of got to coast in the Western Conference. And it was jarring to see just the lack of answers there. So real questions for LAFC. Again, not from an overall are they really good standpoint, from a winning knockout tournament standpoint. Because to me, they've gone too far on the opposite extreme. Because I talked about not being able to deal with the chaos on Bob Bradley. Now they can reduce the chaos, but they can't create it when they need it. You got to be able to do both. On the Columbus side, just a couple things I want to point out here. 1, this is a terrific story. 2, I'm glad Wilfred Nancy is getting all of the credit that he deserves. This is, again, simple mathematics. I've talked about this with Eddie Howe. To me, this is a similar thing here. Look at what he did with that group in Montreal. A bunch of players that average MLS fans haven't heard of. He turns Jordy Mihailovic into an MVP candidate. He then leaves. They can't even make the playoffs. You give him more talent. You give him the ability to go pick out a guy to complement Cucho Hernandez and Diego Rossi by selling Lucas Del Real. You let him build this team in his image. And they are phenomenal. It's just simple. It's a simple addition problem. And I guess you could throw some, proportions in there. Not a math person if you can't tell. But when you give him more resources, more talent, he is only going to be better. What he did with Montreal was the floor, and it was incredibly impressive. Now he's got the ability to go build one of the best rosters in the league. He's one of the best coaches in the league. He should be in Europe as soon as he wants to be. That guy can coach. And he was also rewarded for being stubborn, which sometimes can absolutely come back to bite you. But this time, he got rewarded for it. Because it would have been easy to sit there and say, Julian Gressel, Christian Ramirez, you were great in the conference final. You're the reason we're here. To a certain extent, at least. Going to start them both. He went, nope. We're going to stick with Maitan on the wing. We're going to stick with Mo Farsi. And by the time he started making substitutions, they had scored 2 goals already. They were dominant without those 2 guys. They didn't need him to win this game. He is not going to change for anyone or anything. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. But on the day it mattered most, it was absolutely a good thing. And the final part of this for me is just the ability to rebuild a team. Because think about this. One player from this crew team featured in both the 2020 MLS Cup Final and the 2023 MLS Cup Final. That player is Aiden Morris. And I'll also take a minute here to wax poetic about that midfield. I know Darlington Nagbe had a couple giveaways late. Those 2 guys are sensational. It doesn't show up in the stat sheet. To me, that position is the most undervalued in the sport. Those holding midfielders, maybe even some box-to-box guys, the ones that don't show up in the stat sheet, but that do so much to shape the way your team plays, and that can completely take an opponent's midfield out of the game like you saw. Yes, it's great that they can both have 90-95% passing. But it's not even that. It's so much more. They are the reason this all works. Because you can play a back 5 behind them, because they're going to counter press, they're going to win the ball back, they're going to make good decisions, they're going to set tempo, they're going to get that front 3 involved. It is a perfect system for them to play in, and they are so good that they don't need any help. It is so hard to find those kind of guys that fit into a system like this. That give you what you need defensively, that are also excellent as pressing higher up the field, that can create. It is so valuable, and it doesn't show up on the stat sheet. Back to the larger point, though. Aiden Morris, right, started 2020 MLS Cup because Darlington Nagbe got COVID, so he wasn't even supposed to be a starter. But that is it. You went in, you got Cucho, you replaced Del Rayon with Diego Rossi, you rebuilt the defense, you brought Mo Farsi, Sean Zwozecki, of course Patrick Schulte up from Columbus Crew 2, and that team that won the MLS Next Pro. You bring in Odmondson, bring in Julian Gressel. It is a very impressive roster construction and the ability to successfully transition from one era to the next. Darlington Nagbe is still around, but that really is about it. And so I just want to give the front office and just the organization credit for that. Because I ultimately come away feeling pretty similar right now than I did in 2020. Even though it's completely different teams. And that is simply, they might not have looked like it game in and game out. And maybe they weren't quite what I'm about to say this season because of FC Cincinnati. There is no doubt in my mind at full strength they were the best team in MLS in 2020. If you remember, Darlington Nagbe got hurt that season, so they really struggled without him. That's why they weren't a higher seed. They just didn't have their best version of their team every single game. And it was the weird COVID year. There was a lot going on. To me, if you just put them on the field for a normal 34-game season, Columbus is the best team in the league. Now you're talking to me between Columbus and Cincinnati. Can have the conversation which one you'd rather have. I would be just fine if you give me Columbus. I'll put it that way. But it's this idea that it's the combination of they're not just squeaking into the playoffs and getting hot. There's nothing surprising about what they do in the postseason. They are this good, and they showed it this season. And also, you've got a first-year coach, so you're going to have some growing pains as players learn the system. You bring in a crucial piece midway through the season. There were reasons why they weren't going to win the Supporters' Shield. Whereas Cincinnati had all this continuity from last season, hit the ground running, and were just great. So, they weren't necessarily the best from start to finish, especially if you factor in the regular season. They weren't even all that impressive in this postseason until this game. From a statistical standpoint, they were, because that's the way they play. But Atlanta gave them at least a little bit of trouble. Then they had to go to extra time twice. They were not emphatic victories they had to get to MLS Cup. Which is why this is not an accurate description of a team that... I'm not saying this because they won. I'm saying this because I picked them to win beforehand because I really thought they might be the best team in the league. And that there were other people that were probably... I'm not alone in that. So you can have a conversation whether they're the best team, second best team. But it has that same feel that as you're building over 34 games, because the stakes are so low, it might not all come together, and that's okay. But it's also not just they show up in the postseason. That's a discredit to what they did in the regular season. And quite frankly, that's not an accurate representation of how this postseason played out. But what you have, once again, undisputably, is a team lifting this trophy that you go, deserving champions. Same thing with LAFC last season, same thing with the Crew in 2020. Absolutely deserving champions. You don't always get one, because this is a weird format. It's designed for chaos. They were able to survive it. And so here the Columbus Crew are again with this collection of superstars, guys playing from their MLS Next Pro team, some kind of journeyman defenders, these two midfielders, the guys coming off the bench, MLS journeymen who are making real impacts. And they don't let the opportunity at home go to waste. And so, congratulations to this team. Like I said, unequivocally deserving MLS Cup champions. What they do in terms of their style of play speaks for itself. It is so, and this is the final end on this point. I hadn't really thought about all this too much until I started talking, but I'll leave you with this. Going back to LAFC under Rob Bradley and Manchester City, it is so difficult to win knockout tournaments playing that way, because so much is predicated on your ability to control everything. And that's just not how this sport works, especially in 90-minute increments, right? It goes back to my chaos point and being able to win multiple ways. If one part of the formula is off, you're in trouble. If you give up a goal to an LAFC or a Cincinnati that wants to play in transition and is comfortable sitting back and conceding possession, you're in trouble, because now you're playing into their hands by doing what you want to do and what you have to do because you're trailing. If you just simply can't find the back of the net one day, you could lose on penalties. Or you give up a weird goal and that's that. Because the goalkeeper has the game of his life. You waste your one good opportunity and they score off a set piece, something like that. It is set up to be kind of, I would argue, I firmly believe this, a disadvantage in a knockout tournament to play this way. Doesn't mean it can't be done. Obviously, City won the Champions League last season. But I do believe there is a reason why City haven't won more Champions Leagues, why LAFC didn't win an MLS Cup under Bob Bradley, and Wilfried Nancy got this team playing this way and won an MLS Cup in year one. That is awfully impressive. One more time, congratulations to the Columbus Crew, your 2023 MLS Cup champions. That is all for this video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you next time.